Welcome to the High Rise Podcast, presented by Headset, the leading data and analytics company for the cannabis industry.
So Emily, we were just down in Santa Rosa at Hall of Flowers, one of the great events, I think, for cannabis, particularly when you're trying to get in front of, what's going on in the brand space and all the innovation around that. It was full few days. I felt like super busy and kind of getting back to things. I feel like, I've been off Twitter. Something kind of might have happened and I'm a little behind. Any ideas here?
Yeah, I don't know. There was an announcement over the loudspeaker at Hall of Flowers, which was not accurate, but it was pretty exciting. And actually, before that, I had heard the news from my brother and ran around, got to tell a bunch of people. So that was really fun to deliver some good news for a change. But what was it, Sai?
Something about President Biden and his position on cannabis, which I don't know, I'm still kind of recovering because it's been so long now since any president has even acknowledged this industry that it's hard to believe. And in some ways, it's hard to get excited about. And I think that's just a little bit of, we can't have nice things in this industry. Like, will this really happen? Is there really something? It's not just talk at this point. There may be things afoot. So yeah, it's pretty exciting to see, and everyone that's listening obviously saw the news. We're not breaking the news. At least I hope not.
4 days
But if
later.
we are, hey, got great news for you.
Yep.
Yeah, Biden started on October 6th with tweeting, as I've said before, no one should be in jail for just using or possessing marijuana. Today, I'm taking steps to end our failed approach. Allow me to lay them out. So I won't read everything here, but basically he made 3 points. First, he issued a pardon of all prior federal offenses and simple possession of marijuana. Then he urged all governors to do the same with regard to state offenses, which is really important because, as we all know, there's not, as far as incarceration, it's disproportionately at the state level, not at the federal level, but there are still federal incarceration. So that's important. And then finally asked the Secretary of the HHS, or the Health and Human Services, and the Attorney General to initiate the process to review how marijuana is scheduled under federal law. And we all know marijuana or cannabis is Schedule 1. So looking at, changing that, right? So descheduling is what we all want. Maybe something like a Schedule 3, is still on the table. But it sounds like a lot of people have different opinions on what this means. But the fact that they're looking at, descheduling or changing the schedule is something pretty significant and opens up a lot of opportunity for us in the space. So yeah, definitely a huge announcement. And at Hall of Flowers, what you were alluding to there, I was there as well when I heard that President Biden has now, was it just decriminalized cannabis completely everywhere? So that was good, but maybe not wholly accurate. But still pretty exciting to be there in the crowd, especially at this time in the industry, as so many people have been struggling. This is an opportunity for some significant change. So let's talk about it today.
So my brother sent me a message and he wrote, wow. And I have to be honest, it's been so long that we have not had good news that, of course, wow to me was something terrible must have happened. And then I called him
said,
and
wow, that was it?
He just wrote, wow. And I was like, what W? I mean, at that day, I think because it was a busier day, there wasn't great reception. So I called him and he told me what was going on. And I was like, this is remarkable. And then everybody was doing business face to face. So a lot of people like you and I were not as online as ordinary, like when we're sitting behind our, desk. Yeah. So I was happy to deliver the news because even just from those of us who have been in the industry for a while, the criminal justice aspect of this really does matter because we have to see reform around this. And, whether or not people think the MSOs are bad corporations, whatever. I know a lot of the leadership in these organizations really do care about seeing reform around social justice and criminal justice and cannabis. So that alone was a big step. But then in terms of the indications for the business, side of it, I do think it's really important because talk of descheduling is 100% the right thing that should happen here. But if we can reschedule it, we have to get it down to like tier 3. That's really where it needs to be on the third schedule. If we go to tier 2 or schedule 2, this could be problematic for the business dynamics of this industry and just also unnecessary. So I'm very hopeful that there is wisdom around what happens next. And as you know, I called Safira right away, who we've talked about on the pod before, just to make sure once we heard that it's being decriminalized. I was like, well, that escalated quickly because I'd heard about what had actually happened. And she said, no. And so what we're going to look at is probably a review process that ordinarily would take about 180 days. Now, I did think this was an interesting move because you and I have also talked about how well this issue polls. I remember you brought up the Newsmax information pointing to 74% support for medical cannabis reform and also for ordinary business support for these businesses from the GOP, which like we talk about it all the time. I know Brady Cobb talked about it on Fox News today. Like, show me another issue that polls so well across the aisle. And so we had a sense, and I know we had talked about it, you and I, that there's a chance the politicians would hold on to this issue because we're short attention span theater in this country. So they would hold on to this issue as close to the midterm as they could so they could bank the credit for it, right? Like people who were in favor of the college credit, that's distant history already for people who liked it. Not everybody liked it. And so this, they wanted to get as close to the midterm, I feel, as possible. And now what I'm seeing, and it was interesting to see, to your point, the response from the governors of the states about how they would handle it. Like, obviously, Abbott was like, absolutely not. Arkansas was pretty opposed to it. But then other governors were like, well, we're going to review this, which is maybe one of the best things we could hope for if they're a state without any legal reform. But the thing I thought that was really interesting, I've been waiting to see what Schumer and Booker would do because immediately they started tweeting about it. And I thought, they're going to feel like this issue is getting taken out of their hands to get credit for, which is great. So any pressure that we can witness around this to get movement going in the executive branch, legislative branch, anything, I'm considering a win. And so then today, Booker said that he's hopeful that with this movement from the executive branch around this, that he sees more movement on SAFE in the lame duck session. Does that sound correct to you?
Yeah, that's exactly what I saw too today. And that's still exciting news. I know there's a sense that this might happen, before the midterms, but it looks like it might, according to Booker, it might be something that's on the table post midterms. And really, midterms are right around the corner here. So, unsurprising. But also, I think, it's good that it's still being acknowledged. This isn't like the end of it, right? This is just the beginning of the whole thing. And so, I'm with you, right? From the executive branch, like to see anything, like we haven't seen anything since the Cole memo, or even since the Cole memo was rescinded, which was like a negative thing under Trump there. So it's really good to see this. The process can take 180 days or up to 180 days. There's been some reporting that the HHS says they're going to try and expedite it and do it as fast as possible. So, anything can happen. I honestly have no idea how long like a process like this would take, but 180 days, 6 months. I mean, I'm okay with that. I think that during this period, things are going to be changing, right? I don't think it's going to be a light switch. Even though the day that it was announced, when you looked at cannabis stock prices for the MSOs or BSDN or others, out there, like it really popped. I mean, what was Poseidon up that day?
Yeah, it was up about 28%. The NAV, which is driven by the underlying holdings, was up 32%. And so that's like a market maker disparity, which usually gets tightened up within 24 hours on the next day of trading. And that was over like what, 2 hours? I mean, talk about a pressure cooker ready to go. It's really exciting. Another thing you and I have talked about extensively is this notion of private industry leading where there's slowness at on the policy side. And everything I hear about from these organizations of either corporations that want to get into it or other private investment firms, they're all waiting for an indication that this is going to change. I don't think they're going to wait for the official change. So, yes, to your point, we may be moving into a 180-day review cycle, or maybe they expedite it. I've rarely seen things expedited in the government, maybe the vaccine, but, I think that
That's a
for
fair
COVID,
point.
but
Day
it was
179, there'll be the announcement, right?
yeah, but I think that my take is that it won't be something that the capital is going to wait for, that the exchanges may even move more quickly. And there's a lot of work being done on a parallel path around that for listing these companies on the NYSE or the NASDAQ. And then further to that, just corporations getting in terms of putting their dollars to work into the industry.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of an analogy I think of. It's like when it flips to spring, and that day that it happens, generally it's still really cold and still feels like winter, and you kind of notice or you hear, you read, oh, it's the first day of spring today, but it's going to take some time before the leaves start coming in and it starts warming up. But at least we're set up, we're on our way, and so I feel like it's very much that. So I know there's been some pullback, in the public markets I've seen, since that day. But I think it's just the beginning, right? And it's just going to keep building. And you're going to hear these stories. You're going to see changes where, I mean, we've talked about all the time, all the effort that you guys are involved in, trying to open up the NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange and get them comfortable, right? And now those conversations, I think, can be had in a way that, there's a path to it. It's like a clear path. It's not just like, trust us. So there's going to be some change in the future and just let's do it in this environment. It's like, let's start the work now, because in 6 months, we know it's going to be different, or 6 months or less, we know it's going to be different. And so all that work that needs to happen ahead of time can be done. Those conversations can happen. The organizations that are, sitting on the sidelines, the consumer packaged goods companies, the beverage alcohol companies, tobacco companies, that have kind of been investing in some way, with their investments in Canada, with kind of keeping track of the market. We have a lot of them at Headset that are clients, but they're really just kind of keeping a pulse on, what's going on. But now they're going to be really digging in, like, doing those exercises. Okay, what happens in 6 months when it's completely descheduled? Like, what is our opportunity? What does the world look like? And so that work can happen tomorrow. And I think that's what's really exciting. And then, come 6 months, it'll deschedule, and then it'll accelerate even faster at that point. So, well, I think everyone is desperate for like an instant, like the announcement at Hall of Flowers, like it's legal, all of a sudden it does take a little bit of time. And I'm certainly as impatient as anybody, but I'm really excited about, what happened that day, because I do think that there's a fundamental change for us. Like, it really switched, and we're just now starting to kind of come to terms with that and what that means. And I'm doing a lot of work really thinking about, what does 6 months look like from now for the industry and for Headset, and how do we adapt to that? Because I know it's going to change, and I don't want to wait 6 months. I want to be ready for that day. So pretty exciting stuff. And I think we're going to be talking about this, I don't know, for the months ahead. And what you said about Booker and safe, like, we're still pushing for that, and people recognize that, that's still a huge challenge. Even if, these 3 points go through on what Biden's doing, all the governors go through with the pardoning, right, at the federal level, and then we get it descheduled, you're still going to have banking problems, like the stuff that we just talked about with Terrell and Suzanne, right? Those issues will still exist, I think, even though we're in a decrimmed world. I think, there's still those challenges. And I think that, seeing some banking reform will happen probably during, that process. So maybe it'll all come together, and we're going to be in a really good spot 6 months from now.
Yeah, I mean, this morning I woke up to headlines that, Russia chose violence yesterday and Ukraine responded. And so there's a lot of things happening on there's a lot of geopolitical uncertainty because there's a lot of things happening in Latin America. We now have essentially a dictator running Italy. Things are shaping up to be pretty rocky from a geopolitical standpoint. And at the same time, we're also looking, I mean, Jamie Dimon said today, recession 3 to 6 months. The Fed's super hawkish. People are not. I just saw this chart that detailed the thing that I've been fearing is coming, which is that credit is exploding and people's savings are down below where they were pre-pandemic. And so there's a lot of things lining up to point to economic uncertainty on a macro level. But when I look at cannabis, I think about the fact that this is significantly a domestic industry. Yes, there's some exposure to Western Europe in this market and some in LATAM, but what we're talking about a lot has to do with North America, but specifically the United States. And if we, when I think about what happened with history rhyming, prohibition of alcohol ended during a time of economic strife. I mean, it's really an interesting thing to think about. It did create jobs and industry, and the same thing is happening here. I saw Biden tweeting today about the jobs that have been created during the tenure of his presidency. And while I'm happy about the steps he took on Thursday, I thought, well, cannabis has created jobs in spite of the fact that this administration has not been supportive and, in fact, has spoken out against people employed in cannabis or who invest in cannabis. But hopefully this is a time where we're seeing the tide changing. And I know Kamala Harris today jumped on and started tweeting about it. And so we'll see what happens next. But, I think Ben Kovler pointed out that Biden's tweet about this, I think, was one of his top tweets ever. So, I mean, talk about just popular support around an issue during a time when things are looking a little bit sketchy. And so, yes, I think we're going to have some market volatility, especially as we've talked about that these names trade on the OTC markets. And so they're thinly traded, low volume. So a few shares here and there really move it in a magnitude of percentages. And so while we're going through a time of kind of economic uncertainty, risk off, you're going to feel it in our market. But the important thing is we could see these changes that demonstrably change how the business is run.
Yeah, and I feel like this is just the beginning.
Thanks for listening to the High Rise Podcast, presented by Headset. For more information on Headset, visit headset.io.